Welcome to The Romantic Side of Suspense with Sarah Hamaker. In each episode, she'll talk with your favorite romantic suspense authors. They will take you behind the scenes of the writing process, giving excerpts from their writing, and share stories about their writing life.
Deadly Commitment by Kathy Harris. Will the truth about her fiancé be more unsettling than the stranger who is stalking her? Danny Kemp fears she's being stalked, but the truth is much more deadly. Her new fiancé, Robert Evans, has a dangerous secret. The homeless man who is stalking her, Caleb Samuels, may prove to be her only escape from a hidden danger. Will she discover in time that neither Robert nor Caleb are who they appear to be? And the one person she fears most may be the one person she needs to trust.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of The Romantic Side of Suspense. I'm your host, Sarah Hamaker, and I'm so glad you joined me. Today I'm talking with Kathy Harris. She's an author by way of a divine detour into the Nashville music business. So welcome to my show, Kathy.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. I'm glad to be here.
Now, I loved and I'm sure you probably get asked this a lot, but one can't help but ask, divine detour, explain.
Well, I heard the term years ago, and when I started blogging, and it's been like over 10 years now that I've been blogging, it's a huge commitment, but it's been a lot of fun. I decided that divine detour really sums up a lot of my writing and just life in general, and that is that sometimes God takes us on a crooked path to the right thing. And that's different, by the way, than following the straight and narrow. But, we can't always assume how God plans to get us to our calling. And that, to me, just kind of sums that up for all of us, just not just me.
Yeah, no, I love that because I think it reminds us as Christians that we don't get off our quote-unquote path and by ourselves. Sometimes it is, it's always, not sometimes, it's always God who's directing our steps. So these detours that we think, but I'm not going to get X if I, go this way, but this is the way I have to go because of circumstances. We can really kind of look at that and think, our life is over, or this is, X is never going to work out, or all those things, but reframing them as divine detours, like you so succinctly put it, I think can be so helpful and healthy for our spiritual growth and our relationship with God.
And perhaps that's all about just committing to His path for us and not worrying so much about, because we do kind of want what we want, right? And if we really commit to God, we don't understand the best way to get there, but He does. One of the things that has intrigued me about blogging, and the way I blog is mostly interviewing other artists and then some music business people like songwriters, artists, and that kind of thing. I usually ask the question, 99% of the time I'll ask the question, have you ever had a divine detour? And almost everybody says, yes, exclamation point. Let me tell you about what happened to me. And, it's 99.9% of the time, it's like an excellent thing, it's like I wouldn't have had this great thing if it hadn't been for that. So everybody seems to relate to that. We very few of us just head straight to our goal. And I'm grateful that I didn't, because I wouldn't have had what I write about if I hadn't had my divine detour. So.
Right, and I think that, when we can focus on it as from God and not just put there to vex us or frustrate us, which God sometimes needs to work on those failings in our life to bring us more in line with His calling, that it can really help us just to kind of not embrace them, but not fight them as much, if that makes sense, and they kind of go, okay, well, let's see how this is going to work out, how this is going to, get me eventually to X. But then sometimes God changes our desire for X and
I agree.
we now want why.
Agree. Right, I agree. Yes, totally. It reminds what you were saying. Reminds me of the old saying, "Never pray for patience because God will give it to you."
Yeah.
And that's kind of what a detour is in some ways. But I can't say that the path I had wasn't another exciting path, because my detour. I went to as a little girl, I wanted to be a writer, and I went to college to learn to write, and I got out of college, and I wanted to take a job and do that kind of thing and write books, and, I wanted to do that all my life almost, and instead, God took me to the music industry. He moved me from Illinois to Nashville to work with the Oak Ridge Boys, and it's been an incredible career, and it has, 20 years ago, I decided that God really was ready for me to, and I have done some freelancing and things, but God really wanted me to start writing the stories that I wanted to write. I wouldn't have had those stories unless I'd had the last, X amount of years in the music business, because most of my stories have a music element. So.
Yeah, no, I've always wanted to be a writer since I was a little girl too. We're twins, separated at birth. And that's my career. I worked on magazines, and then I'm a freelance writer as well as a fiction writer now. But my dream was fiction writing, and that took a lot longer. I was writing, sure, but I wasn't making things up. I had to tell the truth in the stories.
Exactly.
In the world of nonfiction writing, and which was fine. I mean, I've met a lot of interesting people. I've written about a lot of fun things, and that's all good. And but it took a long time to get to the point where I had a book published, and I have an agent, and I'm writing more of what I love to write. But it was a long time coming, and I'm not sure that, kids I don't think would necessarily were a detail. They were more like a pause. And there was just, things in my life that had to take precedence, and that was okay. I still was writing, but, nothing was happening with the writing. And I think sometimes we need to realize that I was growing, I was learning. Like you said, I was experiencing things that I think have made me a better writer. But I probably wouldn't have said, I think I need to live a little more before I can start writing. I always wanted to be writing and published. We always want things to happen a lot quicker than they do.
We do, and I also remember being told once that building the playhouse is a lot more fun than than playing in the playhouse. And I think that's actually true, because once you're seriously on deadlines, you realize that it might have been more fun dreaming about writing than it is sitting in a chair for like 48 hours straight, But
writing is hard work.
Yes, it is hard work. And I've lost my train of thought, Sarah, right here on your podcast. But.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, so I'll fill the airspace, and you can
great.
remember your train of thought. And I also think that the it is more fun to write when you don't have a deadline, and when you have a deadline, it's all of a sudden you feel like, oh my goodness, somebody's expecting this, and that can be a whole another set of pressure that we didn't realize would come with being a published writer. Did you remember your train of thought?
Well, I did, and it was actually completely different, which is probably why.
That's okay. We can change horses in midstream, like they used.
I love that.
Used to say.
The riding a horse sounds great. I love horses. One of the things that happened for me, because I didn't give up on my dream of writing, I just didn't do anything about it for all those years I was busy in my music career, and I'm still in the music business. But I would start a book, and I wouldn't get past 2 chapters at least. I was still wanting to do it. And then at one point, I had a birthday. And at that birthday, I said, God, you've been so gracious to get me here. I want to turn everything over to you. And, I had done that. It was a recommitment that a lot of times we make all the time. But I was like, my writing is one of those things. I want my writing to be for you. And that was the thing that I hadn't known as a little girl, was that I would be I wanted to be a Christian writer. I mean, that wasn't there. And so the minute I started my next book idea, which was a Christian book idea, it flowed. I finished it. I mean, quicker than anything I've ever finished. It's the one with the dust on it, under the bed. It's that manuscript.
Yeah.
But, and I found ACFW, American Christian Fiction Writers, and learned that there's actually, even though I had gone to school for writing, gone to college for journalistic writing, I found that there is a craft that you need to know about before you write fiction. And I learned, and I met people, and I had a great time, making new friends. And then I wrote the second book, and that's the one that got published. So, God was growing me as a Christian in my commitment to Him there, as well as giving me the experience, of life for my books. So,
yeah, and I think we all have those books that we wrote, and they will never see the light of day. And everyone should be very grateful they're not going to see the light of day, but they were fun. They were fun. I found I was like you. I mean, so my mom kept everything. This segue has a point, I promise. And she had a big house. And so when I moved out on my own, she's like, okay, here, she kept giving me boxes of stuff, So one of them was a box of my childhood writings and my teenagers and stuff.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, it was like they were like in a binder kind of thing. I said, well, I'll keep it. It's not that much. Well, one day, this was like years ago, my girls found it when they were like in upper elementary school. And they started reading it. They're like, Mom, why didn't you finish? Like almost all of them are like unfinished stories. It was partly because, I had to handwrite them out, and, I just got tired of writing. I don't know how Jane Austen and all those other people wrote all those things.
It's a lot easier now, yes.
It is. So partly it was that, and partly it was just I got, you get to the murky middle and you don't know what to do, and I'm like, okay, I'm done.
Oh. Yeah.
Kind of thing. But they were just like cracking up because they're like, Mom, we don't know. These were good. Where do they go? And I was like, oh, who knows? At this point, I don't even remember writing them. It's so long ago.
Exactly. And what a gift that was to you from your mom. I mean, all pack rat stuff isn't necessarily a gift, but that.
No. There was much junk that I threw out. That I
think. That same kind of family, Sarah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I've had to turn over a new leaf on that one.
Yeah, and so we have a time, I think, for maybe one or two more questions. So let's just ask, why do you like writing romantic suspense? So you see from your bio, which my listeners can read, connected with this podcast, that you wrote nonfiction first, and then you had your fiction book published. So what attracts you to writing romantic suspense?
Well, it's kind of a funny story because, first of all, I wanted to write fiction. I think I'm a storyteller. I think I'm a storyteller as much as a writer. I get that from my dad. And my mom, her trait is kind of like, she just likes to make up scenarios. So I think that's why I'm a storyteller. But I wanted to write women's fiction. Ironically, I had read a lot of romantic suspense, throughout my reading in life, but I wanted to write women's fiction, and my first book, The Road to Mercy, is women's fiction because I like to write about the angst of life and how God brings us through it. And so after the first book, my editor and my agent got together, and they said to me at one meeting, both of them said, we think you should write romantic suspense. And I'm like, no, I write women's fiction. And they're like, no, really, you should write romantic suspense. It's what you do. And even in my women's fiction, I had some of that in it. And so that's when I actually started writing romantic suspense. I have had some readers say it's a little different as a romantic suspense, and I think that's because I still have that element of angst in women's fiction in there a little bit.
Right. Well, that's great. And we are out of time. I mean, I love that.
Oh, my goodness. Sarah, that was quick.
I know. It's always fast. So thank you so much for being on my show, Kathy.
Thank you.
You have been listening to The Romantic Side of Suspense. I'm your host, Sarah Hamaker, and I've been talking with Kathy Harris. She's an author by way of a divine tour into the Nashville music business, and you can read more about her and find out how to connect with her in the notes for this podcast. Now, stay tuned for an excerpt from one of her latest romantic suspense books, Deadly Commitment.
Now an excerpt from Deadly Commitment by Kathy Harris. "If you're looking for your pretty friend," the security guard said, "she's gone. She left a while ago." "How long?" Caleb removed his hand from the elevator door, allowing it to close with a pop. The uniformed guard looked at his watch. "I'd say about 20 minutes. "Thank you." Caleb took off running. What had Danny been thinking? And why wasn't she answering her phone? As he turned the corner at the cross street on his way to Amore, his head swirled with questions. The most important being, was she safe? He settled into an easy pace, slow enough not to miss something suspicious along the route to the restaurant, and fast enough to satisfy his worried mind. Urgency in his gut pushed him forward, but concern that she might be lying somewhere in a dark alley along the way tempered his speed. He searched right and left for any sign of danger in the shadows, which had been deepened by the foggy rain. Pulling his jacket closer to his neck and the bill of his cap down over his eyes, he kept an even stride. Danny kicked and clawed at her assailant. He would not win, not as long as she had any fight left in her. But she could feel herself losing ground, sliding toward the street. Her strength was no match for this guy. She calculated the location of his foot. What she wouldn't give to be wearing high heels right now. She landed a blow with the heel of her boot into the man's ankle. "Ouch!" He cursed and loosened his grip. Danny struggled to break free, but his upper body strength was too much for her. When he clamped down again, he tugged her toward the street with a renewed vengeance. A block from the restaurant, Caleb saw movement near the front door. The area was dimly lit, but he could see two people standing close together. Maybe embracing? That couldn't be Danny. If she was anything, she was fiercely loyal. How else would she have put up with Robert Evans for more than 2 years? The rain was now coming in torrents. Large drops of water pelted him mercilessly. He ducked his chin and averted his eyes toward the ground. At his feet was a massive stream of water. If he hadn't looked down, he would have stepped off the sidewalk into a maelstrom. Where was it all coming from? He looked to his left and then to his right. Why hadn't he seen it before? There was a breach in the fire hydrant across the street. Turning his head in the opposite direction and straining to focus, he could see another open hydrant not far from the back door of the restaurant. No wonder the place was flooding. So it wasn't only rainwater filling Amore. Most of this flood was man-made, leaving him with the obvious conclusion. Luring Danny back to her work was a ruse, and that meant her life was in danger. Caleb's presumption was punctuated with a scream. The two people, now less than 30 feet in front of him, were not a happy couple after all. The man was dragging the woman toward a car. It was Danielle. With no time to calculate options, Caleb jumped across the tide of gushing water in front of him, clearing it without difficulty, and landing on solid pavement. If his old track coach could have seen the move, he would have been impressed. Caleb sprinted toward Danny and her attacker, who by now had pushed her fully inside the sedan. He could see she was fighting with everything she had, but it wasn't enough. Stepping up his pace, all Caleb could hear was his own breathing, ragged and rasping, and the memory of Danny's scream. He reached for the Glock inside his jacket, and taking one final flying leap, closed the space between him and the car. Grabbing the man by the shoulders, Caleb threw him backwards and onto the ground. The thug bounced off the pavement, crying out in pain. "Run, now!" Caleb grabbed Danny's hand and pulled her toward the curb. She scrambled into the shadows of the building several yards away. Caleb turned to deal with her attacker, but in a split second the man jumped to his feet and bolted to the other side of the vehicle. "Stop! TBI!" Caleb brandished his weapon, but the man dove into the backseat of the car just as it sped away, tires squealing. Caleb seared the number and letter sequence of the license plate into his memory, and then turned back to Danny. She was cowering in fear, staring at Chef J.C. Alexander, who was holding a gun, and it was pointed in his direction.
Thanks for listening to The Romantic Side of Suspense with Sarah Hamaker. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review. You can sign up to receive notifications of upcoming podcasts and listen to previous editions at sarahhamakerfiction.com.